kiss for you.
Oh, well, today we're going to be talking about the differences between certain screen types. We're going to be talking about OLED, QD, OLED, LCD, mini LED, micro LED, CRT, and some of the stuff in between. So, first thing I want to kind of talk about is my background. So, as you can see in a lot of the videos I tend to be doing now, I have various backgrounds that kind of cycle between whatever we're doing. And I guess the first and best way to demonstrate kind of what I see here is to record it. Now, obviously, it's going to be different depending on what your screen is, if it's an LCD or an OLED. If you're watching this on a phone, it's most likely going to be an OLED screen with all the bells and whistles and all that stuff there, high brightness, contrast, all that stuff. We'll talk about it in a second. Don't worry if you don't know what that means. But you're most likely watching on an OLED if you're using a phone, because that tends to be what phone screens are now. If you're watching on a monitor, a computer monitor, then it most likely is an LCD, because monitors haven't really gotten that OLED treatment to a reasonable degree yet. If you're watching on a TV, then you probably have maybe an OLED if you have a higher end TV. If you've bought TV in the last couple of years, it might be OLED. If it tends to not show black levels as much or be sort of heavier, then it's probably an LCD. Now, if you don't know what this means, we'll start by, I guess, explaining it. So, as you can see here, we have this image. My cursor is tracking. Yep, okay. So we have this image here, and as you can see, I picked this one because it has a lot of dynamic elements. So you can see the rocks on the bottom here are quite dark. However, on an LCD like my monitor is, it's quite gray, right? You can kind of see this haze that's like a bluish gray. And if I OLED, if I pop this up on my phone, for example, then it might not look like this. It'll look probably a lot fuller because it's able to display like the dark corners, for example. We have this red. The reason I picked this red is because in a lot of OLED, specifically, you'll see this red be very vibrant, very alive, very bright. In the LCD landscape that we have here, it's not as bright, right? You can see it's kind of like dim or dimmer. It has kind of like this weird banding effect going on the sides, but overall, it's relatively not as bright as it could be if it was using an OLED. You can see also sort of the bottom here isn't as bright. Everything's kind of like normalized, right? Everything's kind of like the same level of brightness. Similar with the side here, right? It's pretty gray, and so those are kind of the main things you're going to be looking for, right? You have on the side, you have things that are blue or gray or don't show black as well, and you have stuff maybe that should be brighter, like this sun here that isn't being shown as bright. Those are kind of the two ways you can tell, oh, this is an LCD, is because you have grayer black levels and not as bright spots. So yeah, this is an image that can kind of demonstrate that. If I go to the next image, we have another example of kind of this, where we have the suns here, all three of them, and they're not as bright as they could be. They're kind of overshadowing things. And then we have this darker element here that doesn't really get as dark, right? It's still quite gray. So overall, I would say definitely these kind of images are really good to show the range of color, which is a primary reason and difference between the options. So with that said, let's get into it. First off, we're going to be looking at LCDs. That's what we talked about just now. That's how we're looking at this image and seeing suns that are not necessarily as bright as they could be and darker elements that are not as dark as they could be. LCDs have been around forever. Without going into the technical detail, they basically need liquid crystals that twist, and those twists allow you to, these twists basically allow you to change the color depending on what you pass through them, but obviously since they twist and don't completely turn on off, they let some light through, which is how you get grays that tend to be, you get blacks that tend to be pretty gray. If I type in LCD, as you can see, you tend to get very small, simple things, and I guess the one image I use to show this is basically the fact that you need a backlight unit right here, you need color filters, you need the liquid crystal display, and then you need a frame. And these twist, and they pass color through it, and that's how you tend to get color on these things. And that's what this one's showing, right? This is an example of a filless monitor that is an LCD, and you can clearly tell because like with this here, it has that, you can kind of see, if YouTube compression doesn't ruin this, you can kind of see the same mellowed out, sort of flattened look that a lot of the screenshots tend to have because they're using an LCD panel. They can't really express color that well, right? LCDs tend to be pretty cheap. They tend to be, again, lacking brightness, lacking color, but they do tend to have good viewing angles, right? LCDs tend to have pretty good. If you're like moving left and right and up and down, they tend to be pretty consistent, which is good. Next off, we'll move on to OLED. So as you can see, there's an OLED, and you can immediately hopefully tell the difference between something like, let's see if I can get one with a black background. Is this black? No, I'm looking for a specific black background. Give me a sec. This is black, okay. So you can see right the black here, because it's a panel. You can see basically this is just all black. It's all gray. You can't really see the detail in here that much, right? You can see the green and that stuff, but this is basically just all black, not a ton of detail that's being shown here, right? If I go to this OLED, as you can see, there's quite a bit of detail, right? You have the black that looks very black, and then you have these colors that are kind of coming out on the side. You have this color here. You don't see, as you can see on the band around it, you don't have like an emission of orange, right? So like on the side here, you can see this kind of like band of orange. You don't see that on the screen itself. You see it behind it because they're using color LEDs behind here to kind of showcase different colors. But as you can see, it's black, and then it goes straight into kind of the you can see it goes straight into the orange from the black. So there's not like a band around it, which tends to be what you get on OLEDs. Same thing with all the colors, and we have this, and as you can see from the sparkle, sorry, this is a lower screenshot, right? You have individual pixels here that are not sort of banding, that aren't showing color around it, they're just kind of there. And that's because with OLED, you can have perfect blacks, basically, which means the pixels, because screens are by pixels, the pixels can turn on and off individually, meaning you can have black be literally black because they're off, and white be actually white in certain areas because it's just a single pixel turning on rather than stuff around it. This is why your phone, for example, will look better if you're watching this video than something like a monitor will, is because your phone is using OLED panels, because, well, another thing is they are quite expensive. They tend to be quite expensive, more expensive anyway than LCD. So your phone tends to use them because your phone is probably pretty expensive. Or not, it could be, even now cheaper phones have OLEDs in them because they're such a small quantity, right? They're a small screen. Something like a TV, OLED TVs are going to be a much more expensive because you have inherently a higher volume you need to fill. And yeah, so typically people who get OLED TVs tend to value the OLED more, and they'll pay more for it. Because they tend to be more expensive because you need to have these the on and off panels. So we talked about LCD, talked about OLED. Let's now go on to a couple new technologies in OLED called quantum dot. So very basically, quantum dot is a way to kind of augment sort of some downsides with OLED. Because as we said, for LCD, the downsides are obviously lower black levels, lower vibrancy of colors. They tend to be a little less exciting, less dynamic, less contrast, right? Pretty basic standard displays. OLEDs, obviously, they have that black level. They have the colors and that vibrancy that you're looking for, but they also tend to be more expensive. They don't get as bright because they have to, they need more power, basically. They don't have a backlight because everything can turn off individually. So they tend to be not as bright, cost more, and have potential for burn-in because when you're, let's say, this is blue, and if you have something like a score or a timer or something in this corner that's always blue or always a certain color, then it can obviously lead to burn-in where the pixels kind of show a ghost image of what you're looking for. Quantum dot tries to sort of get rid of some of those downsides in terms of color and sort of waste, because a lot of the time you'll have, with OLEDs, you'll have color filters, right? So you'll have, as you can see here, these color filters, like red, blue, green filter. You have white in the back, and the pixels kind of go through them and then shine a light through to whatever screen you're looking for. That is pretty good because it allows you to basically have white and then shine whatever color you need to and make it relatively cheap. The problem is you lose intensity. So what do? Well, you need to have another white pixel on the bottom right here to add on to the 3 that you already have here and then allow for more intensity. The problem with this kind of augmenting of the system is that then you inherently lose some efficiency and some vibrancy in the colors, right? You're not truly getting red, green, blue. You're getting white, red, green, blue. So something like Quantum Dot tends to try and fix that problem by, instead of having a backlight that you then need either crystals or their own OLED system, you can just have those be basically self-emitting blue, and that way you can get rid of the color filters here. This example is using LCD because you can have Quantum Dot LCDs, but in OLED you would typically have a blue self-emitting, get rid of the color filters, and then just use that. So you tend to get better colors. You combine Quantum Dot with OLED, and all of a sudden you get these really nice colors that don't burn out as much because you're not worrying about color filters and stuff. It also allows you to have more interesting viewing angles, right? Because I guess one of the other problems with OLED is because you don't have a backlight, you can't adjust for different viewing angles as easily because inherently the pixel is in front of you, in front of the TV. With a backlight, you can kind of adjust depending on where your view is because you can kind of shift things to one side or the other. So for this one, Avenger QD is that you have, for instance, like 81% of the viewing angles versus a conventional OLED, which might have like 50% in terms of color shift and stuff. So that's that. All right, so we went through LCD, OLED, QD OLED, the reasons you might want to use either of them. Now let's talk about the two newer technologies, which are micro LED and mini LED. Let's start with mini LED first because it's pretty basic. So this is an attachment or an additional specification to LCD panels that tend to make them brighter and more vibrant in color. These, however, do not make them OLED, and they do not prevent them from having kind of the same issues that LCDs would tend to have. They also, I guess one of the main advantages is the fact that they tend to be obviously brighter and more colorful, but also more power efficient than having an LCD, having mini LEDs that can turn on and off, right? You get black glows and that kind of stuff, but you don't generally get the quality that OLED tends to provide. And so far we've only really seen mini LED displays in iPads, the new iPads, because it's better than having OLED, right? Just generally speaking. And you also kind of start to see them in monitors, although those are pretty expensive right now. Main advantage of mini LED, as we said before, you don't need backlight. You can just have you need a backlight in terms of the mini LEDs, but you don't need like a solid white panel that tends to take up space and stuff that a typical LCD would take up, right? The black frames around a lot of LCD monitors, you don't need that anymore when you have a mini LED. So you have, when you have mini LED. So you have the LED right here. You have, in this case, we're having a Quantum Dot. And then you have LCD panel, and as you can see, the Quantum Dot panel has all the color. The LCD panel is 3, and this mini LED is just like a side of just a bunch of LEDs. And so they tend to create very vibrant images. They tend to create, as you can see here, lots of spectrum color. They tend to usually be 10-bit color, which is a little bit out of the scope that we are currently dealing with. But yeah, and they're just, as you said before, mini LEDs, right? They're LEDs, mini LEDs, 1/100th of an LED, and so they're able to give you a lot more granularity. When it comes to that, again, only use an iPad, some monitors. Generally speaking, you'll probably see this mostly used in monitors, depending on how well we can get a monitor for OLED. All right, now time for the big standout one, the one that maybe not a lot of people know about, or one that's kind of like in the background here. We're going to be talking about micro LED. Now, micro LED is super cool, mainly because it kind of tries to combine the OLED benefits and the LCD benefits. Mainly we're trying to look at power efficiency, the colors, we're trying to do stuff like prevent burn-in, we're trying to have great viewing angles, obviously be more efficient, attempt to cost less, generally allow for different varieties of displays, not need to be limited to kind of the square format, and micro LED basically allows us to do all that. So as you can see from this demonstration here, this is in CES 2023, which was in January, I believe. They showed off one of the first commercially available micro LED displays. That's super cool and allows you to, again, basically have that combination of LCD, viewing angles, and power efficiency, and that kind of stuff with the OLED colors and contrast and in-game colors and gambit range, right? But then not have like the burn-in risk and sort of the other fragility that OLED tends to have. The only issue is, as you can see by this person and the relative size of the screen, this is currently its infantile, which means that if you try and buy one, if we just look up micro LED TV, you'll see very quickly that the only one right now is something that Samsung calls the Wall, which is a 110-inch behemoth that costs $150,000. And their most recent one is 110 inch right here, and the most recent one's a was it like 89 inch? There was a Tom's Guide article. Yeah, this one. Let's see. Yeah, so basically right now we have something like the 89-inch micro LED TV that costs $102,000. We have this, the Wall, which costs $150,000, and then we have a different outside one that costs $200,000, and that's a 37-inch one. So these are really big sizes, and that's mainly because, as you can see from up above here, a 10.1-inch panel currently costs $5,800, and a 14.6-inch costs anywhere from about that to about $10,000. If you were to extract that out to a 65-inch TV, you're looking at the current pricing of TVs being about $37 to $45K to build. 65-inch micro LED TV, that's just to build. It doesn't include, actually what it sells for. A lot of analysts, however, predict that those same prices should be coming down by 75%, which is fantastic until you realize that if this one's selling for $100K, that means your 37 to 45K TV is now selling for 8 to 11K and not selling. Really, a lawnmower? Oh my God. It's whatever. Joys of living in college. There's construction over that way. There's a lawnmower. We had a random rolling blackout. Everything's good. Anyways, so that will change it from a 37 to 45K to a 8 to 11K. So that's predicting that 10.1 inch is going to cost $1,277, and that 14.6 is going to cost $2,400. Which is obviously much better, a reduction of 75%, but that again still means that your standard TV is going to cost like $12,000. But obviously they're going to look at this because it's pitch black outside and they're mowing the lawn. All right. Well, yeah, so they're obviously going for this because it's the hopefully the future of this technology, but it's just a very long time away. Let's look at these TVs. So we have the 89-inch one, looks like this. The only way they can make this look normal is if you have a person staring outside their New York penthouse in a single purple chair next to their bed as the TV is floating beside them, like this. And whoever buys this is insane because, again, it costs $102,000, this one, which is obviously a lot of money, and it's supposedly going to go by about 75%. So most people that are buying it obviously just want to say, hey, just invest in Samsung, right? I don't think any other company currently has the ability or technology to do that. However, that said, we do have this by C-Seed, which is a different company. And this one is obviously showing it next to your pool, which I can't imagine why you would want to do that. But yeah, this is the new TV. It costs $233,000, and it rises from the ground on either 165 or 137-inch display. It's an Austrian TV maker, 4,000 nits of peak brightness, all that stuff, right? So that's nits of brightness is basically how bright something is. One thing I forgot to mention that this pointed out, so like LCDs, right, they'll have input delay, right? You'll click your mouse or your keyboard or something, there'll be input delay. Most of the time it's not really noticeable on monitors and that kind of thing because they're kind of designed to be relatively low latency. TVs, however, because you're just watching content, don't tend to be that. They tend to have much higher latency, so if you were to connect a mouse or something, you would probably feel the latency in that case. OLEDs on that factor don't, because they have a millisecond response time. They basically have immediate response because the pixels are kind of just like zip, 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 zip. They don't have to wait for the turning and stuff. Typically means immediate response time. So if you connected a PC to this, it just did basically anything. If you were typing, for example, you would feel it's much more connected. That gets kind of portrayed a little oddly. So for example, in this one, if you don't really know what they're talking about, having a refresh rate of 4,000 hertz is kind of a lot. Again, most monitors will be like 60. You're seeing this in 60 because recording software tends to not record in anything higher than 60. My monitor itself right now is running at 144. There's monitors that run at 240 and 360 and blah, 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 right? Most TVs tend to run, I think, on the higher end scale at like 120. It's hard, obviously, to kind of demonstrate that because, again, you're watching this in 60, but it's just a lot more smoother. With something like TV, the only time you're really going to notice a hertz rate that's high like that is if you watch high frame rate content. So, for example, I think Captain America, Civil War, and there's some other movies that was in 60 frames a second, and they can see it's very smooth and very, more game-like, I would say, than something like the movies that tend to be about 24 frames, so they have, motion blur, and it kind of just feels like a typical movie. Sometimes it feels a little jarring to have MCU be 60, and it kind of feels like you're swaying in motion and soap opera and stuff. But yeah, the only time you're really going to notice it is either in sports or in these higher frame rate things, is where you're going to feel that 120 hertz TV. So when you see something like this that says refresh rate of 4,000 hertz, all that basically means in this case is that it's going to be running at like 120 for most content if it can do that, but it has a response time of like 4,000, right? So I could 4,000 times every second mostly is when it's updating and refreshing and that kind of stuff. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to necessarily tell that because it's usually going to be locked to something like 120 or 144, just because we don't really have anything that can display at refresh rates higher, like to our eyes. I'm sure there's things in the computer that are running basically at that right now, but you'd never be able to tell because they're so quick and they happen in the background. But yeah, so if you thought this was useful and you'd like to see more of this kind of stuff on the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button and all that stuff, and I'll see everyone in the next video.